I'm really happy to be here. I've been spending a lot of time in Europe lately and moving around with my group and trying to find regulatory zones. And I'm going to tell you why we would be looking for those. Okay, so my company is BioViva. And BioViva was formed because in January of 2013, my son was diagnosed with diabetes type 1. And it was a big shock. I was in a children's hospital, which is considered a research hospital in Seattle, Washington. And they didn't really have any alternative treatment but the same old, insulin and bolus. And that was one thing. That was okay. It was something to get used to. But what I really didn't like about my experience there is there were a lot of children who were dying of diseases. And they had no options. There were no experimental options for these kids. It was, I guess, considered more ethical to let them die than to try something that would be considered experimental. Okay, so this was in early 2013. I had already been working as an advocate to stem cell use for the couple years before that, so I knew that science had come a lot farther than what we were seeing in the hospital that I was in. And needless to say, I ended up at a SENS conference that summer, about 6 months later. And I was looking for cures to disease, actually cures to childhood disease. But I looked into this thing called longevity. And what was really fascinating to me was something that I didn't know. So a lot of you are early adopters to an idea that you would like to live a very long time and live healthy. I was not an early adopter to this idea. I had to find it. So I had to have it preached to me and understand through the science that actually everyone was sick, now in my eyes, sad to say, and that there was potential cure for it. And I actually thought that with this knowledge, we would be able to fund this thing in short order. So we're all sick, everyone's going to come out and they're going to say, let's fund this, let's get this thing going, and let's find a cure for disease. If not this child's disease, the disease that I have, and these diseases may cross over and there may be a general cure for all disease, who knows. So I started a company called Biotrove Investments and found out this was a very difficult thing to fund because there was no human proof. There was no proof or evidence that we could actually cure aging, what I consider a disease. So, a very difficult task for somebody who is actually somewhat introverted like me. I had to create a company that would create that proof. The proof, the evidence, the human work that in the human body, many therapies that have had years of research, up to 20 years of research, could actually work in a human body to affect the state of disease. Maybe the state of aging, maybe even reverse aging. And these therapeutics have implications to childhood disease, I'm happy to say. So I got to stay on my mission and create an innovative company that has actually created a lot of buzz because we think very differently. So here we have the diseases of aging. But I would argue that the master disease is biological aging itself because it underlies these diseases. And it's the driving force. It's the #1 risk factor of your mortality is your age. Okay? So I often, and I won't do it this time because this is a pretty advanced thinking audience, I often, when I talk to groups who don't really understand what sort of a problem we're trying to tackle, I ask them to pick something off of this list of what they would like to die of. And actually, usually I get a couple people raising their hands, and they'll say, well, maybe heart disease, but only if I die in my sleep or something like that. But when you put things into this perspective, it changes everything. When I first started this, I said, I'm going to go out and do a presentation called How We Die. And I was told by people over and over, don't do that. People don't like to hear about how they die. They want to hear that you're going to solve the problem. But I found out they weren't actually interested in getting behind solving the problem if they didn't know that it actually related to them. So you know, and you probably do know, about 1/3 of this room will die of cancer, another 1/3 will die of heart disease, and another 1/3 will get to pick something else off of here. I'm sorry that you won't die of cataracts, but you might die of glycation. I did notice that was on there. Somebody once said, cataracts. So, easy way to go. Okay, so what is the problem? So why does my company have a reason to exist, okay? So by 2020, we're going to have more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 5 on the planet. That seems okay, right? We're getting older. But what does that mean? So if we're extending lifespan to around 120, we've got actually 1,004% more people will live to be over the age of 100 than have in the past. So what's the problem? We're retiring at 65, right? How do we afford it? So here's life expectancy. Let's put things into perspective. Let's see how science has changed how we live already, okay? So we have increased life expectancy massively over the last couple hundred years. And as we've done that, a lot of people ask me about this, the outcome of curing disease, would the world be overpopulated? As we've done that, as life expectancy has increased, birth rates have decreased. We actually have fewer children when we live longer, which seems counterintuitive, but it's true. So this is the problem, and I talked about that on the last slide. We have less people under 5, they go on to be 15 and 25 and 35. They become the workforce. As the 65-year-olds become 75, 85, and 95 and become grossly debilitated, there isn't enough of them to actually afford health care for the aging populations. And we're seeing this more in Japan than anywhere else. We see the pressure cooker is on. China is right behind them. We see devastating diseases coming up that actually have a price tag. I hope that in the future that healthcare is free, okay? We're working on that. It's gonna take us a while, okay? These are industries. We're used to the business model of making money, but we can actually save a lot of money by curing disease. And you can see the impact of cancer is about $1 trillion a year, as is the impact of dementia, not to mention the other diseases on this list. So why gene therapy? Actually, this is usually an animated slide, so it does a little bit better job when it's like that. So let's look at mice, okay? I'm not a big fan of mouse studies, but research starts there, and it's a good place to start. If you take a field mouse, a mouse out in the wild, it lives about 6 to 8 months. That's pretty short lifespan. It gets a little slower, it gets predated. If you put it in the lab and you protect it from predators and disease, it doubles its lifespan. So that's kind of like humans in houses, you know? It's like antibiotics. It's like the little comforts that have expanded our lifespan now that we saw on one of the last slides. If you take a mouse and you put it on calorie restriction and you exercise it regularly, it lives longer, quite a bit longer, as a matter of fact. This works in mice. We're trying to see if this works with humans. We definitely know that optimizing the body is a great thing to do, but we can't say for sure and definitively how much extent we'll get out of that. But if we look at mice and we change one gene, in one case a knockout or in one case an addition, we get an exponential increase in the mouse's lifespan without calorie restriction and exercise. So this is the kind of thing that we would like to do with human bodies because it's ethical, because it's a good idea to cure disease, because we all want to be better, stronger, faster, and smarter. We think, therefore, we would like to live and live well. So our company is looking at a couple gene therapies right now. The cool thing about BioViva is this. We're not a research organization on the side of where the therapeutics come from. We're not committed to one therapy. We're actually open to anything that works. And that makes us a little bit different. The second thing that makes us different is that, in one sense, you can think of us as research. We want to research in humans. We want to get access for compassionate and right to try use in human patients and run actual trials, which lies outside of what we can do in the US, that show whether these therapies work or not. and if they work, in what bodies they work in what bodies they don't work in. So one of our therapies is the telomerase-inducing gene therapy. So this shows a lot of promise. It's worked very well in mouse studies. As a matter of fact, Maria Blasco just came out with a new paper that showed that even healthy mice that had it induced in their bodies lived better longer. Okay? Is this a cure-all? Probably not, but it's actually a really great place to start. So we believe that by affecting the stem cells, we can get a better cellular division longer over the period of your life, so to try to keep you from getting stem cell depletion. And we're very interested in what this does to the cell as far as restoring the genome to what appears to be a youthful state. The second one is a myostatin inhibitor. And actually, this gene therapy is a lot less, there's a lot less to debate over this. This is in phase 3 clinical trials with Becker's muscular dystrophy right now, and it's going into phase 1 with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. It works. We know it works. We know it increases muscle mass and strength. We think that this will be fantastic for patients over 65 who need increased muscle mass in order to keep their mobility, to keep from breaking hips, having falls, and actually keep them in the workforce longer. So we're really excited about this. It decreases white fat. It increases insulin sensitivity in animals. We'll find out what it does with the children in the studies and what happens in our patients. So safety and efficacy has actually been performed on this for one disease state. Our targets. So again, we will continue to look at different gene therapies and we will use what works. We want to strengthen muscles. We're already doing that. We want to increase cell signaling, lengthen telomeres, reverse atherosclerotic plaques, boost the immune system. Therein may lie the closest thing we might find to a cure for cancer. Clear misfolded proteins and remove senescent cells. And we have a couple companies that have actually contacted us that have senescent cell killing gene therapies that are exciting. And we've talked to one group that actually has monoclonal antibodies that do that, that people might feel is an easier step to use than a gene therapy for those who are shy. Okay. So there's a couple ways that we can do gene therapy. One is in vivo, and that means that we put it directly into your system. And this is what I had done. So I used both of the gene therapies that I had described. We used them in one trial, basically like a case study. I wanted to prove safety of the telomerase inducer. I wanted to prove that we should move forward with this. I ethically couldn't use it in a patient, which is actually quite pathetic. When we looked at the FDA, they wanted us to go back and do animal studies, and I felt like people are dying now, so I went ahead and stepped forward and took it, and I feel fine. The other one is the myostatin inhibitor, and that one is intramuscular, again, so it's in vivo. There's another way to do gene therapy, though. It's ex vivo, and that's when we basically take cells out of the body, generally stem cells, and we transduce the gene therapy into those cells, and then we put those back into the body. So successes in gene therapy, actually we're seeing successes every day. So I would like to put things into perspective. So as long as pharmaceuticals have been around, 97% of what they have created is just drugs that ameliorate disease. They slow the progression of disease. And yet in the last year and a half, there are 6 medical cures in the pipeline with gene therapy. And we actually see no end to that. Okay, we believe that by taking control of the genome, we will have the biggest successes. Of course, we'll need the supplemental therapies for a long time, and I think stem cells have big uses, especially for regrowing organs. That's a fantastic use. And for ex vivo gene therapy work, as long as you can get the cells to take in the body. But let's talk about some successes on the mainstream, not what BioViva is doing, because we are very early stage. So Glybera, they recently treated a patient, a 40-year-old patient, with lipoprotein lipase deficiency in 2015 to a full cure. And this is fantastic. The problem with this system here and for this woman was the high cost of gene therapy. So one of the things we're always asked is, will this be available for everyone? And actually, the research that we will do in labs is to bring down the cost in gene therapy significantly. So we're definitely going to be investing big money into doing that because we want treatments for everyone. Also, this year, GSK came out and had passed their treatment for immunodeficiency disorder in children. And this is also a cure. So this is fantastic, and these are just going to continue to roll out over the next several years. This is today's market, which is, I think that we're actually using a different presentation than I was used to. Okay, so we believe that these will be given like immunizations. So right now, our goal is to work in sickest patients first for compassionate care use. We want to use these gene therapies in people who have no other option and see if we can move the bar. This will be a very difficult group to work with, but we're willing to work with this group to see what sort of impact gene therapy can have. We would like to move them back to preventative medicine and consensual use. And we'll actually do that as soon as we can safely do that. So what are the future consequences of this type of therapeutic? So this is where things get exciting and fun. Obviously, organ regeneration inside the body would be fantastic. Radiation resilience. NASA actually contacted us about the telomerase-inducing gene therapy to see if this would be a viable way to protect the genome against the damage that radiation causes. Better vision. Again, space technology. Digital interface. This is something we're talking about more and more. The cyborg of the future, I think somebody was recently talking about on stage, and it's so fantastic. It's quite possible that the cyborg of the future is actually biologic. We're starting to code in DNA. We're starting to see the mass advantage. What about integration into your body of neural networks and a phone that you'll never lose? I think that it really will be fantastic, and it could really reach bounds that we don't understand. Intelligence, Beijing is doing research on looking at the genes for intelligence. Only they would be daring enough to do that right now. Physical enhancement, well, we're already tackling this, but I think it'll get better and better, and I look forward to a day that you can look like how you feel inside on the outside, because we're all a little bit different. Nutritional, maybe turning back on the gene that makes what we call vitamin C. This is also great for space travel. Autoimmune disorders, this is something I would love to tackle. Right now they're quite complicated. Diabetes type 1 is something that I would like to eradicate from the earth. And congenital disease. This is where most of the gene therapies are starting in. They're starting in the orphan disease status. And I actually attended a meeting that was all about the FDA, and it had FDA specialists there. And these therapies are actually expedited for reasons that are understandable to them. They don't really like to expedite therapeutics that have wide use, because if something goes wrong, they feel that they have more of a burden. But the orphan diseases are easier to pass therapeutics through, and they're actually mandated to get so many therapies into their trials and through the FDA. And so these are more quick to move, and they're actually quite necessary, and they actually give us really great data on gene therapy. So I spend most of my time now traveling around the world and doing a big call to action. We're trying to get governments to take down their borders to fight one enemy, which is disease, to discontinue a political regime against each other, and to open their mindset to a better world, and a world that we can then solve the bigger problems. So, of course, I always ask people what the strongest currency in the world is. We believe that it's time, and I think that you'll agree, and we hope that we're successful so you can figure out what you'll do with yours. I would like to invite up Avi Roy, because we have a project that we're working side by side with that is a very important project, because we can affect humans, but how can we prove that we're affecting them? Okay, so if we do treatments on patients, you don't want to just look at our data. As a matter of fact, BioViva has everything done by third parties. We don't want to be liable for our data until we have a firm grasp on what we're doing. We want to only prove what works and what doesn't work. So how are we going to track human bodies to know that we're affecting them and on what level? So I want to introduce Avi Roy. He's our Chief Scientific Officer, and he'll talk to you about the P3 clinics.
Right, I'll be really quick. So something that came out of working with Liz is trying to determine what is happening with Liz after Liz has taken the voluntary treatments without telling anybody. So that is the genesis of where the P3 clinic came in, and also from our frustrations, my team and our frustrations as to trying to track aging and trying to do something about it at the clinical level. Also, Aubrey, during his talk, mentioned, and there was a question as to, oh yeah, Victor, you asked the question, as to how do you determine if something is changing. So people look at Liz, and especially when we are traveling in, let's say, east of London countries, maybe further east than here, people look at Liz and they're like, well, she still looks her age. So she's taken gene therapy, and the expectation is that you would have the silver bullet that would make Liz look more like Liz's daughter back there, which is the reason why we travel with Liz's daughter, is that we switch them around when we go to Eastern countries. So I don't think Savi likes that. So the biomarkers of aging is a very, very important project, and it's a project that nation states have utterly failed at doing that. Victor and Sven will know that there is a project called, was a project called MARKAGE, M-A-R-K-A-G-E project, which was the European Union funded project to determine the biomarkers of aging so that we could conclusively say that these markers correlate or maybe cause the diseases of aging that Liz showed in one of her first slides. So since governments are not doing something about it, we thought, why don't we do it at the clinical level? Now, Calico, Human Longevity Inc., they're technically trying to do the same thing. But what we are trying to do is to bring all of these layers that you see here together. So everybody goes after the genome. Some people go after the transcriptome. Some people have started going after the microbiome. And we want to do this all for our patients, complete that with what we have today, which is ultrasound and MRI scans, and build a whole picture so that we are able to do the prognostics and see if we can predict a clinical relevance for those things. We will certainly do software-based prognostics, but we also want to do iPS cell-based prognostics. So grow the cell lines out, form the patient, and see what possibly might they suggest that could happen to their particular cells. Also, testing drugs on them. That part, the IPS part, is still lagging behind. So our clinic will launch very soon, and it'll have diagnostics and prognostics. Initially, it'll have whole genome, microbiome, transcriptome, and metabolome, but we'll be adding all of those layers from Eric Topol's drawing, which is back there. But so MRI scans obviously will be there, and so will be ultrasound, and we'll be adding those layers to bring the data together to show the prognostics, the chances of what might happen in the future. And the idea is that we would have targeted therapeutics. So Liz was talking about the inefficiency of the drug industry, which is some of it is here. I'm sorry about the quality of the picture. For some reason, translating it into PDF seems to have lowered the quality. But this % of people is where the drug is not working. So you can see that in cancer, in about 25% of the drugs, 25% of the patient gets any benefit at all. By the way, when the 25% do get benefit, over the last 15 years, the cancer drugs that have been tracked, and cancer is not any one disease, but the study in JAMA, or Sven will correct me, shows that it increases median lifespan by 2 months and a few days at $9,000 per treatment. So that is what we're working with. So we hope that the diagnostics and prognostics will help us get a better handle on biomarkers of aging. We can use that to bring about regulatory change. But most importantly, we can use that to test treatments like the one that Liz has done, like the one that others are claiming are changing, are making you younger. So we could test those and we could work out if things are working or not. So that's the aim of the P3 clinic. The other unique factor is that it is hypothesis-free because it is run by scientists and passionate surgeons. So we will be a clinic which is a global consortium. By the way, this would be something like the outcome that you might see, which is why we are partnering with. So this is what I was talking about the consortium. We will be a consortium of clinics across all of these places, and we will be testing companies that bring out better diagnostics and prognostics to measure the biomarkers of aging, and ultimately, of course, companies like Liz's that bring out therapeutics to treat those things. I mean, treat the outcomes of what might happen of getting older. So it's a hypothesis-free clinic. We're not a stem cell clinic. We're not a gene therapy clinic. We're all of those things. We're a regenerative medicine clinic and trying to solve aging. So it'll be an accelerator and an incubator and trying to test treatments. And it'll be working in all of these countries. We'll be launching in London, but we have partners in all of these places who will share expertise and, of course, patients. And these are some of our collaborators. The augmented reality or human that you saw is our collaboration with Cambridge University and with the HoloLens, Microsoft's HoloLens program. So that's the P3 clinic in a gist. If you want to talk more about it, obviously I'm available afterwards, but I'm going to give it back to Liz, for whom you probably have lots of questions.
So I get to be patient zero for that too. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
So you're saying that you would like to extend our telomeres as a kind of general rejuvenation plan, and
Yes.
I think that sounds very sensible given what we know about it. But then we just had Aubrey de Grey saying that he wants to keep telomeres from extending as a general, mostly general cure for 85% of cancers. Are these visions
Sure.
really viable?
Yeah, actually, this is an important conversation to have because telomerase has been okay. So when Geron did the research on telomerase, they went into two different areas. Some people took it into doing research on longevity, and other people took it into seeing how it interacted with cancer. Okay, so we know in cancers that at least 80 to 90% of them that telomerase is turned on, and it helps immortalize those cancers. But in animal studies, actually telomerase induction protects against cancer. So we know that we don't want to get cancerous cells. I think we know that. And out of the over 10,000 papers, I believe, that have been written and peer-reviewed on telomerase has never been responsible or considered responsible for causing cancer. It's merely a gene that gets turned on that helps to immortalize the cancer. So I don't think that telomerase induction causes cancer, and that's why I took quadrillions of viral vectors into my body to show that this evidence would probably be true. I mean, we make cancerous cells regularly. I was 44 when I did it. I certainly wasn't a spring chicken. We don't know what will happen in every human body, and this is something we have to look at. So the thing is what we need to do is not get into a research debate on what we think might work and what we think doesn't work. We need to find out what works in humans. So that's what we're asking to do, is to find out what happens in humans. And if in humans we find out that there's a certain age group or a certain amount of mutations in certain bodies because of where they've worked, what they've been exposed to, that it caused cancer, we would certainly take that very, very seriously, even if the other percentage of persons were absolutely biologically age reversed, if we were so lucky to have that outcome. So what we are saying is what we need to do is work in humans to find out. So even though there's a correlation between these things, there's no evidence that telomerase causes cancer, is what I'm going to tell you. Okay, but maybe Avi wants to say more on that. You're saying?
I think Aubrey could get the mic as well, but Aubrey was talking about the alt pathway, which is an alternate extension of telomerase pathway, not the standard one. So that again is a difference. Plus, at a cellular level, okay, it's fine. It's all right. It's all right. It's fine. Aubrey hasn't had much sleep at all. No. But I mean that's. There wasn't any. I was just saying that you were talking about the alt pathway. Yeah. Not the normal way the cell works with telomerase. Yeah. I mean, similarly, you know how you metabolize glucose in your cells when you exercise is the same way a cancer cell metabolizes glucose. Doesn't mean that exercise is causing cancer. So, yeah. So, I mean, a cell does 100 things in a cancerous cell that it does in a normal cell as well, like building actin filaments. So, why don't we say that if a cell builds an actin filament, it's a cancerous cell? Or, I mean, it's still, yeah, it's correlation is not causation.
So in the future, I think that what we'll find is actually affecting these things, being able to turn them on and turn them off will be the best outcome, right? To take the power over these genes and affect them when we need to. So in cancer, we certainly do not want telomerase to be turned on. But immunotherapies and things like this and things that SENS are working on right now will flesh out these points, and only when they're in humans will we really know. But yeah, there's two streams of research, so if you follow the longevity stream, you don't see cancer incident. But if you follow cancer, then of course you're going to see it written into the papers, but not as a causation, just as a correlation.
Thanks, great talk. This might be a little bit more for obvious side of the equation. So you were talking about the diagnostics there, and you showed some, genetic biochemical diagnostics. What about sort of adding the low-hanging fruit of physical diagnostics? Gait, response time, and that kind of thing. I know, for example, George Church's lab has been very interested in getting some kind of physical biomarkers because they're relatively easy. Is there a plan to work that in as part of the comprehensive biomarker tests?
I cannot not work that in. I mean, most of the clinic, I didn't show you the people who are working, are made up of surgeons. And you know how much surgeons like new techniques? Not at all. Like, I mean, evidence-based medicine is a field that started in 1970s in Oxford. Like, I mean, that's, whereas, yeah, I mean, so no, obviously that'll be in, but it's how we integrate that with the genomic and the proteomic and the cellular data. So I bring in my bias as a cell biologist, and the surgeons bring in their bias as a human butcher. I mean, well, in a nice way. No, they're all great friends of mine. So no, but somewhere in the middle we meet, and we try to determine how we can present a cohesive report. That a HoloLens augmented vision that you saw, how do we integrate what's happening at a cellular level all the way at the tissue and then and present a report? And what we have come up with is to show organ by organ score, which for me, I don't even know what an organ is. It's just a collection of cells. I only care about the individual cells. But yeah, so you can tap on an organ. Our prototype shows that you can tap on an organ and it'll give you like a biological score. That's a simplistic way, and you can then explore it deeper. Gait would probably do that, absolutely. And it would probably provide a lot of detail about your musculoskeletal system. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I read JAMA just like you do, and gait is a big correlation with aging, and faster or slower gait shows or relates highly with all-cause mortality. So absolutely, we would have those in. Those are not the difficult parts. Integrating everything in is the difficult part. Thanks, Keith.
I think what I really love about the P3 clinics and what we're doing is we're actually bringing medical doctors and researchers together. And this is funny because these two groups don't actually intertwine very well. When I was doing work with stem cells, we were just doing educational work to the public about what stem cells were, what embryonic stem cells were, that they were not fetuses, things like this, basic work. We would try to get researchers to talk to the medical doctors that we would try to get data from to see if these therapies were really working, because they weren't doing a very good job at tracking it. Because researchers are good at tracking things and medical doctors aren't. But when you actually bring the two groups together and you create a consortium of area and a space that they can communicate with each other, they work radically fast. Because doctors want more tools to work with, and researchers have those tools. You know, there's been, I think, a degree of misunderstanding. I think that a lot of people think that some of the research community, and maybe some of it is, has, you know, sort of balked at BioViva, but we actually have more researchers coming to our side than ever. And more medical doctors contacting us saying that, even medical doctors who have done clinical trials with gene therapy in the US, saying that they want to work for our company. And bringing these two groups together just makes things, it's such a synergistic thing, but you almost need a mediator. So we need to collect the data, but we need to give doctors the tools to do what they do best, and they need more tools. Allowing people to die because the myth of bioethics, that we cannot use an experimental therapy on someone when everything that we have is experimental. We're part of an experiment. Is just what I consider completely unethical. And more people are getting behind this idea, and I hope that you'll consider it too.
Yeah. Hello, this is a question for both of you. Didier, here. Didier Cornel. So it's kind of a political question. You said, and I think it's important to say, that you want these therapies to be available for everybody.
Yes.
But we all know that there are people afraid that it will be only for rich people, and they are afraid because at the moment the experiments are not made by, let's say, governments, and the experiments are not made by governments, sorry, because there is this very strong regulation making it impossible for you, for example, to test it in the US. And okay, but there is this strange notion of compassionate use of experimental drugs. And my question is, why is it impossible at the moment to use this notion to say, okay, let's test, for example, new drugs on very old people who are going to die anyway. So what's the obstacle at the moment making it impossible to use this concept and when it is used, for example, to fight against new diseases?
Do you want to start that, or do you want me to start that? You go first. Okay, so a lot of what's stopping us is just basic regulation. So when we looked in the US to use some of these therapies for compassionate care use, you could potentially use it in a patient, but if you started to get anything bigger than an n=1, then you're doing a clinical trial, and then you have to go the regular route. Right now, the US is not very good at multiple morbidities, so it's not a good place to try out drugs that might have an effect on all aging diseases. That's a big hypothesis, but of course we like to think that we're working on things that are that big. So anyway, we are looking for regulatory zones that we can do that. We're working with a consortium that is being developed and actually has fantastic people from around the world who are even in governments now, who are helping us ask different countries to re-regulate or to create a new regulation for these type of therapeutics. Life-saving therapeutics, unmet needs, ways that we can expedite the use of the drugs. But every country is a little bit different, so it becomes very country by country is how I would have to answer that question. And so some of them are super convoluted. Actually, some of the smaller countries are super convoluted and some are less convoluted. But certainly what we need to do is get out there and try. So we can do this in the US if we want to raise over $1 billion and probably go about 20 years and have maybe a cure for one disease if we even get past, and then only people with that disease would be able to get that treatment. We're just going for a bigger idea, and I think by going and moving towards a bigger idea, we'll actually get the job done much faster. So I don't know if I answered your question, and if I didn't, hopefully Avi is going to pick up the pieces for me.
I think Didier has known me long enough to know that I'm not going to do that. But no, Didier, I mean, you know how much I know about the political process or the why questions and how much patience I have for that. I always thought that if we provide the tools, then the populace or the representatives of the populace will make the right choices. but then, you know, I'm living through Brexit. So, well, there is that. So much so. So I don't know. I mean, your question is, why don't we do that? Well, I really don't have a rational answer for the really old people.
My question was also how to use the notion of compassionate use of
Yeah.
experimental treatments. Isn't it possible to go to this way to have governments investing in research for them?
Yeah, so use the compassionate care channel to expand that to many more people.
To expand that to research for LGBT.
Yeah. I mean, so of course, what I'm trying to say is that what your question is rather logical, and it seems rather straightforward, but somehow it isn't. I keep thinking that by doing the P3 clinic, I mean, that's just a commercial implementation of what we wanted to do, which is to give government a good precision and personalized medicine outcome to not just show that all of these things that we can track is significantly correlated and predicts 20 or 30 years ahead, or hopefully 20 or 30 years ahead, that your populace or significant percentage of your population is going to be out of the workforce or going to be you're going to be hugely responsible for it, and we can fix it preventively. But I don't know if people are buying that. Similarly, compassionate care, there are two problems with it. I actually am not really fond of the data that comes out of compassionate care. I mean, you've spoken with other researchers who are in our group who participate in compassionate care research. So it's very hard to get clean data out of compassionate care work that you do. And the second thing is that I don't know how to rationally expand it. I think the US is actually doing a pretty good job. Besides the US, I don't actually know many other countries, because in the US you have the right to use, right?
Yeah, but it comes with certain guidelines. So there's the right to try and there's compassionate care use, and each one of the drug development on the research side has to be to a certain level. Compassionate care being, I think, the easier to access. So yeah, it's a very difficult question, and it's how do you actually create data out of it. So what we're asking to do is to go into the sickest patients now, knowing that the outcome probably won't be very good, but we can collect some amount of data, and if we have any wins at all, that would be fantastic, and then work the treatments back. And we think that this will actually be one of the faster routes to doing it. But it becomes very, very convoluted. But the funny thing is that everywhere we go in the world, no matter how high up the person in the government is that we speak to, everyone is for this idea. And they're not just for this idea for themselves, they're actually for this idea for their people. And they're for this idea for the world. And I was actually really surprised to find that. I was happy to find that. But they don't know how to change their regulations. They need help doing that. So hopefully we'll be able to do that. And when you ask me if it's just for the richest people, my company wouldn't be here if it was. We're being very transparent about what we're doing, and we're really trying to drive the costs down on these therapeutics as we get more and more investment. So this is... Oh yeah, I know that people are afraid of that. Of course they are, but then, you know, maybe they're not paying attention that, you know, we are very, these therapeutics exist, right? So therefore, anyone with access to buy a research lab or something like that could have access to these therapies. I mean, that's just quite obvious. We're a company that's specifically coming forward to drive down the cost to make it affordable for everyone.
Didier, one quick thing is that, again, this is coming back to the Brexit campaign. Simply put, like, if we want to step aside all of these things and actually do this stuff, maybe we could just use, you know, the same kind of fudged figures and stuff that were used during the campaign, which is we can just call any of our products organic and chemical free, and then anybody can do almost anything. Anything with it. So then it doesn't matter. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Oh, sorry.
For a second, yeah, thank you. Just a remark in terms of regulation. I think maybe it would be interesting for you to contact the Seasteading Institute. Are you familiar with
Yeah,
them?
I am actually familiar with the Seasteading Institute, and so they're friends of ours,
Okay.
and they're interested. It just turns out that actually when you get out onto international waters, they're not as international as you would think. They do have laws that bind them. They have laws of who owns the ship, who flagged the ship, who drives the ship. And things like that. So those are bigger questions to be asked for consensual use, but I think that if we get a movement as a people and demand access to therapeutics that actually can affect the body, unlike the many of the small molecules that we're taking through Big Pharma right now, who we saw how few people they actually affect, then we will be able to do these right on our home shores. We just need evidence. But it's a fantastic idea. It's a fantastic idea to get out on the sea into these communities. But again, they also drive up a cost scenario.
Yeah, sure. But since I think one of the main business models that they were discussing in one of their writings is healthcare, since, yeah.
And you might have seen BioViva in there. I'm not sure what you looked at, but yeah, we have been in contact, and you know, we would love the ability to do gene therapy, but vastly we have to prove what we're doing, and not just we're not just trying to create any market. We're actually trying to affect human lives and cure disease. So we need to do some amount of clinical trials, and we can vastly do those anywhere in the world legally with the right amount of funding. Thanks.
Okay, so that's the last question for now.
Okay. Is that it? Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, Abby.